Can I test? Testing, testing. Michael, can you hear me? Okay, just want to make sure. I didn't want to be talking into the air. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Radford, and I am the chair of the CESCF Student Evaluation Case Competition. I would like to thank you to the first ever virtual round 2 of the Student Evaluation Case Competition. This competition has been in existence for over 20 years, and we are always looking for ways to innovate. And this year, we have really outdone ourselves. Given the current circumstances and the postponement of Conference 2020, we decided to hold a virtual round and have been working over the past couple of months to bring this session to you today. I'd like to ask the audience members to keep their webcam and audio off so that only the person who is speaking can be seen. Thank you very much. In the first round of the case competition, which took place in February of this year, we had 19 teams from across Canada compete. The judges determined 3 finalist teams, and in alphabetical order, they are Be Better, University of Guelph, Orbis Solutions, University of Waterloo, and Recenter Consulting from Simon Fraser University. We have 2 of the 3 teams today competing, and in order of presentations, we have Orbis Solutions from the University of Waterloo and Recenter Consulting from Simon Fraser University. The team started working early this morning and were given 5.5 hours to respond to an RFP issued by the Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Saskatoon. They were asked to conduct an impact evaluation or plan for the conduct of an impact evaluation of the Big Brothers, Big Sisters developmental relationships, group, and individual mentoring. We thank the Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Saskatoon for graciously agreeing to let us use developmental relationships for the final round of the 2020 competition. We also thank Kim Megiesi, the Executive Director, and Kathy Hauser, Director of Service Delivery at Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Saskatoon, for their input in preparing this case. I would also like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank our sponsors. Without their support, we would not be able to hold this annual event. Our sponsors were highlighted on the slideshow that you just saw, and we will be showing this slideshow again between the 2 sessions. I would also like to include in our list of sponsors is the Treasury Board Secretariat, who provides in-kind translation services for all of our case documents. I welcome our judges today, Natalie Kushuk, Emily Brennan, and Frederick Bertrand. As well, I'd like to welcome the largest audience we have ever had in the history of the student case competition, with over 80 people signing up in advance. A special shout out to participants of the World Evaluation Case Competition who have also joined the audience today. Winners of today's competition will be invited to compete in the World Evaluation Case Competition, which will be held later this year. So just before we get started, a little bit of the logistics. Orbis Solutions from the University of Waterloo will be presenting shortly. Their presentation will last for 20 minutes, followed by questions from the 3 judges, then questions from 2 of our sponsors, Cathexis and Goss Gilroy. And if there's time, we will read a selection of audience questions that have been gathered throughout the chat box option. So audience members, if you would like to ask a question, please direct your questions to Christine Shepard in the chat box option dropdown. I now invite Orbis Solutions to begin their presentation.
Would you like us to be on video while presenting?
Yes, please.
I don't think I have permission to share my video. I don't either. So Sam.
Ali doesn't either. Okay. Welcome everyone. We are Orbis Solutions, and today we'll present our evaluation proposal for Big Brothers, Big Sisters Saskatchewan. Bienvenue à tous. Merci d'assister à notre présentation aujourd'hui. Malgré que notre équipe maîtrise le français, notre présentation sera en anglais et les questions seront également répondues en anglais.
Before beginning, we would like to acknowledge that we're settlers learning and working on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our institution, the University of Waterloo, is situated on the Haldimand Tract. This land, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River, was promised to the Six Nations. We also acknowledge that our words alone are not sufficient. We are committed as Orbis Solutions to taking action towards truth and reconciliation in Canada through our program evaluation work.
Isabella, Amanda, Ali, and myself, Claire, make up Orbis Solutions, and we're from the University of Waterloo. Here's a brief outline of our presentation today. To give a little background about the program, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Canada is a federation comprised of 135 member agencies serving more than 1,000 communities across Canada. Their mission is to enable life-changing mentoring relationships to ignite the power and potential of young people. Specific to this program evaluation, Big Brothers Big Sisters Saskatchewan is an organization consisting of 5 agencies across the province. Those agencies include Big Brothers Big Sisters Regina and area, Big Sisters Regina, Big Brothers Big Sisters Saskatoon and area, Big Brothers Big Sisters Yorkton, and Big Brothers Big Sisters Lloydminster. The developmental relationships group and individual mentoring programs vary across all different agencies. However, there are 3 programs that are consistent. These include the Big Siblings One-on-One Mentoring Program, In-School Mentoring, and the Shared Journey Program. The One-on-One Mentoring Program pairs youth in the community with a volunteer mentor. They meet for a couple hours once per week, and it is a 1-year commitment. The volunteer mentor models positive behaviors or lifestyles for their youth mentee, and they engage in activities within the community. The in-school mentoring program pairs a youth in elementary school with a volunteer mentor. They meet 1 hour per week across the entirety of a school year, and together they engage in activities, including board games, crafts, and sports on school grounds. The Shared Journey program includes Indigenous and non-Indigenous mentors and youth who work together, learn together, and mentor each other, and they meet 1 time per week for a 10-week program, and together they identify actionable items to mobilize reconciliation within their own lives. Big Brothers Big Sisters has a vested interest in improving the lives and outcomes of young people across the province. They include youth from Indigenous, newcomer, racialized, and LGBTQ2S+ communities. Big Brothers Big Sisters Saskatchewan serves 13 communities, including over 1,000 youth aged 5 to early 20s. Roughly 50% of youth served are First Nations or Métis, and 5% are newcomers. Within the Big Brothers Big Sisters youth community, roughly 50% live in conditions that could negatively impact their development and well-being. They're predominantly from low-income or single-parent families. Roughly 25% are involved in social services, and 25% report mental health concerns. To outline our stakeholder engagement, we have several stakeholders involved in this program. So our internal stakeholders include youth mentees, adult mentors, Saskatchewan Big Brothers Big Sisters agency staff, and schools. They are directly involved in the program. Our external stakeholders include our program funder, which is the Community Initiatives Fund, counselors and social services who refer youth, First Nations, Métis, and settler communities, our school boards, and families of youth. We will be engaging stakeholders throughout this process by forming 2 advisory committees. One will be advisory committees with adult mentors, program funder staff, Big Brothers Big Sisters staff, counselors and social services, and at least 1 elder. And we will form a youth advisory committee, including 3 youth from each of the 5 different agencies. These 2 committees will help guide and shape our evaluation plan, as well as help make sense of our findings through our data analysis, and they will provide contextual and a cultural lens.
So after identifying the overreaching mission for Big Brothers Big Sisters Saskatchewan program, we established the objective activities, inputs, outputs, and outcomes for the 3 nested programs. To improve and guide the planning and adjustment of our evaluation, we've illustrated these components within a logic model where we've also identified assumptions, risks, and external factors that may influence the program's success. This is the overreaching logic model, inclusive of the 3 nested programs previously outlined, and I will be detailing each component identified. So the situation highlights the need for the program and the evaluation, which was previously outlined by Claire. The inputs identified are the resources invested into the program, and we have included staff, mentors, funding, time, material, and supplies needed. And we've identified 3 main objectives that are currently being carried out as part of the Big Brother, Big Sister program, Saskatchewan. And this includes the one-on-one mentoring, the in-school mentoring, and the Shared Joumey program. The outputs are indicators that are produced from these 3 programs and allow us to quantify the activities and provide attributing values. For all programs, mentees, or youth that participate, and trained mentors will be quantified, as well as the number of maintained relationships beyond the commitment to the program. In addition to this, each program will have its own unique outputs as listed within the logic model. The outcomes of this program have been identified as short, medium, and long-term outcomes for youth and mentors. Short-term impacts include improved self-esteem and well-being, development of connections with others, and strong bonds between youth and mentors, as well as increased understanding of reconciliation. Medium-term outcomes include broadened worldviews, increased sense of self-fulfillment, and connections with the community. And lastly, long-term impacts have been purposely aligned with the theory of change that's been provided to us. And at a high level, this includes social, emotional competence, mental health and well-being, and education engagement, and employment readiness. So the 3 assumptions of the program that we've identified include, firstly, that youth are willing to meet with the mentors and participate in the activities. Second, mentors model positive behaviors. Third, for the school-based programs, that students attend school. And fourth, consent is given by schools or parents or guardians. One potential risk that we've identified is that the program might not be accessible to all participants. And lastly, external factors that may influence the success of the program include changes in funding priorities, cultural norms, as well as judgment from peers or guardians.
So I will be taking us through the evaluation design, and the first is type. So as was indicated, we are doing an impact evaluation. And just to reiterate the reason for that, the goal of the evaluation was broadly to tell a collective story about the work of the 5 Big Brothers Big Sisters Saskatchewan agencies and demonstrate alignment with other agencies outside of Saskatchewan. So we propose an impact evaluation to determine the impact of the 3 programs that Claire talked about. An important thing to highlight is we're looking at the impact mostly on mentees, but also included are elements that look at impacts on the mentors. Next is the approach, and we have chosen a participatory approach for this evaluation because we believe that the lived experience of youth who are participating in the Big Brothers Big Sisters programs in Saskatchewan are paramount to guiding the evaluation, on top of the experience and expertise of those close to the program. So we're going to do this through the formation of 2 advisory committees, which you heard about earlier from Claire. The committees are going to be involved throughout each stage of the evaluation, and their input is going to drive our decision-making. The iterative approach to evaluation aligns with the culturally responsive evaluation framework, which we use to inform the choice of this approach, as well as inform our timing of committee involvement, which you'll hear about later on from Claire. Because we're using this approach, most of what we're proposing in this presentation will probably be changed, adapted, and improved upon based on input from these stakeholders. Next, just briefly, scope. So the scope of the evaluation includes all 5 Big Brothers Big Sisters agencies in Saskatchewan and the 3 developmental relationship programs which run there. Next, I'll be taking you through our data collection methods. So we propose using a variety of data collection methods, including document review, virtual focus groups, questionnaires, and a method we're calling Art Voice. After data is obtained through these 4 methods, we're also proposing a participatory data analysis approach to synthesize the information. First and foremost, we're going to be doing document review, so reviewing existing records, including the intake assessment and the program feedback, and that's so that we can gain a better understanding about what info is available to us, get some insight on prompts that we'll use to inform other methods, and closer to the end of the evaluation, we'll also use this information for data triangulation. Next is virtual focus groups. So we're planning on hosting 2 types of virtual focus groups, and I'm going to talk about the ones with the mentors first. So virtual focus groups are asynchronous, and they function similar to an online discussion board. So participants log in with a URL, and they respond to a number of prompts throughout a 7-day access period. Prompts similar that you would get in a regular focus group. The neat thing about virtual focus groups is that participants can choose to remain anonymous for some or all of their responses. And we're wanting to use this approach to get at what mentors perceive to be the benefits of participating in each Big Brothers Big Sisters Saskatchewan program for their mentees, but also for themselves. So that's the mentor virtual focus groups. Next, we're planning on using the exact same approach, but with mentees as well. Again, so that we can we want to hear directly from them what they think each of the respective programs, or how each of the respective programs have benefited them. And we're saying, because of the nature of focus groups, that this will be for mentees aged 12 and older. Next, we plan on administering online questionnaires to referral parties as well as parents in order to get the perceptions of each respective individual on how they feel the Big Brothers Big Sisters Saskatchewan programs have impacted their children, or in the case of the referral parties, impacted the youth with which they interact with on a semi-regular basis. Much of the questions from the questionnaires will be developed based on input from the advisory committee earlier on. Lastly, in terms of methods, we have adapted the more traditional photo voice approach as a data collection method for any age, which based on this program would be mentees aged 5 and up. And we're asking participants, or we will ask participants, to represent their experience with Big Brothers Big Sisters Saskatchewan through either a photo, like you would with Photo Voice, or the creation of an art piece, and that can be in any medium. The reason that we're taking this approach is because Photo Voice and art-based approaches can have a number of benefits. They allow for the capture of more abstract experiences than you might get with traditional approaches like interviews or focus groups. They're more suitable for younger children, the art-based in particular, and they can be beneficial to participants as well, because they're a form of empowerment and they can help with self-perception. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about participatory data analysis. So those 4 methods that I just described, we plan on involving our 2 advisory groups, again, that you heard about from Claire, in the data analysis process. And we're going to do that through, again, virtual sense-making workshops. So we try and make sense of the data through think, pair, share style activities with our advisory groups. And that's to help interpret the findings from the data collection through their perspectives and their lens, but also to inform suggestions for our knowledge translation approaches, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
So to address the goals of our evaluation, we've identified 3 overarching questions relevant to the impact of one-on-one mentoring, in-school mentoring, and the shared journey developmental programs across the 5 Saskatchewan agencies. As you can see in our evaluation matrix, we've expanded with sub-questions, and we've identified several indicators we propose to use in conducting the evaluation. In the interest of time, I will review this matrix sort of at a high level. Judges, please note that we've provided you with the PDF version of this matrix in full. The first evaluation question asks about the impact of one-on-one mentoring across all 5 Big Brothers Big Sisters agencies in Saskatchewan. And what we want to know more about really is what the experience of participating in one-on-one mentoring is like for both mentees and mentors. We'll be evaluating indicators collected from our virtual focus groups with mentors and older mentees, from our art voice activities with mentees, and from a review of program records. And what we want to look at here is to collect information about actual participation in the program. Moving on to the next sub-question, we also want to know whether mentees and mentors benefit from one-on-one mentoring, and if so, to what extent. So here we want to gather additional information about perceptions and satisfaction for mentees and mentors, but we'll also be looking for added context of broader changes in youth self-esteem and well-being through our questionnaire with referral parties and parents, and through consultation with both of our advisory committees. And our third sub-question seeks to better understand whether the one-on-one mentoring program in Saskatchewan is consistent with and aligned with our Big Brothers Big Sisters jurisdictions outside of Saskatchewan. For this, we'll be seeking to engage our non-youth advisory committee to make sense of our evaluation findings and to guide our work on this project. What we plan to do in general now is to apply this same line of inquiry to other programs included in our evaluation, as you can see here, where we seek to know more about the impact of in-school mentoring, and on the next slide, where our indicators are specific to the Shared Joumey program.
We know that knowledge translation is an essential component of any evaluation. While much of the strategies will be informed by our participatory approach, in particular, we will make in our sense-making data analysis stage. However, we have a few potential strategies that we propose. The first being a 1-3-25 report. Our one-page summary will be provided in an infographic format for easy dissemination of our results. We'll also be hosting a webinar where we can invite all stakeholders and we can explain to them the results and the findings of our evaluation. We'll also be hosting an art gallery appreciation night. So we will be holding a virtual art gallery appreciation where stakeholders will be invited to join, and they can see all the art pieces from the art voice element of our methods and accompanying narratives online. And we have the option for pieces to be credited, or they can remain anonymous based on the use wishes. We will also be hosting 5 in-person appreciation nights with food and beverages served as a thank you. We will invite all stakeholders, and they will be hosted in each of the different agencies.
So our team has identified 3 possible challenges to our proposed evaluation, as well as mitigation strategies. The first challenge being cultural barriers. We plan to mitigate cultural barriers by referencing our advisory committees and through the use of a participatory analysis. As well, all of our evaluators will undergo cultural training. Next, recruitment of mentees, mentors, and schools may also pose as a challenge. And to mitigate this, we will use virtual focus groups that allow participants to remain anonymous, where transportation will not be required for participation, and mentors and mentees can participate at a time that best suits them. Lastly, we recognize the limited time and budget that has been provided for this evaluation. To mitigate this, all data collections and most knowledge disseminations activities will be conducted virtually to reduce transportation and travel costs.
To go briefly over our schedule of activities, we have 20 to 30 consulting days, which spread over a 6-week period. Our first 3 weeks will be spent developing our instruments and methods, as well as recruitment. We will begin our data collection immediately, and it will span the first 5 weeks of the evaluation. We can start right away because we will do the document review. We will be hosting 4 advisory committee meetings, in the first week to help shape our evaluation plan. We'll be hosting our second on the 3rd week, and then there'll be 2 one on week 5 and 1 on week 6, when we will be completing our analysis and generating our report. As you can see, our knowledge translation activities will be held after the 6-week period. This is because our virtual art gallery will be placed online and will remain online for that 4-week period, as it will require no adjustments on our end. We will also be hosting the 5 events in person over those 4 weeks, and that's because not all days within that 6-week time frame will be active consulting days, so we will have some that we will be able to spill over into that 4-week period.
Lastly, there are 2 specific credentialed evaluator competencies that we'd like to highlight. We feel that these will be needed for successful evaluation and to address competing priorities in varying contexts. The first, from the domain of management practice, is number 4.6, which refers to communicating project progress. And this competency will be needed to recognize and respond to potential changes in project scope and plans as we consult with Big Brothers Big Sisters as a client and through participatory engagement with our stakeholders. The second, from the interpersonal domain, we've identified competency number 5.1, which refers to the use of communication strategies appropriate to the context in which the program is situated. Of course, we'll have to communicate with evaluation participants of different ages, as well as different cultural and social contexts. And so our aim is for our participatory approach to guide our communication strategies, including our data collection and knowledge translation activities. That concludes our proposed evaluation. Thank you very much for your time. We'd like to also thank our coaches, Dr. Kelly Skinner and Dr. Jennifer Yessis from the University of Waterloo, the Canadian Evaluation Society and Case Competition staff and funders for this opportunity, as well as all audience members who were able to tune in this afternoon. We're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Orbis Solutions. I will now turn it over to the judges to ask their questions. They'd like to take themselves
Is it
off mute.
possible to have the video of our other members up as well during the question period?
I'm not sure why they weren't up during the presentation. Michael?
Okay.
That's fine.
Well, have they not turned on their, maybe they have their stop video on? Is that possible?
They just can't, they don't have access.
Yeah, that must be a Zoom glitch, one that I've never seen before, but I've seen many today. So, oh, there's Isabella.
Try again, maybe.
And Ali, maybe.
Well, we can, hold on. Ali and I are actually together, so we can reshuffle around here.
So we have Frederick, do we have Emily and Natalie? Do you want to put your cameras on? And then I'll put myself on mute.
Well, I think I'm going first with the questions anyway, so I'll let Natalie and Fred get their video going while I start. So thank you for your excellent presentation. It was super interesting. It's always fun to see other people's perspectives on the same cases. It's something that we don't get to necessarily see very often in the consulting world. One point that I'm really interested about is youth engagement in your proposed evaluation. So you've highlighted kind of different points at which youth will be involved, different ways that they'll be involved through data collection through the advisory committee. But it's traditionally very difficult to get youth engaged in an evaluation, whether it's in data collection or in other kind of advisory capacities. So I'm wondering if you could just expand a little bit on how you would potentially see the recruitment of youth for the advisory committee and data collection happening, how you might foster their ongoing engagement throughout the evaluation, and then how you might work towards ensuring that the engagement is meaningful to the youth that are participating in the evaluation.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for the first part is youth recruitment. We will be recruiting two ways. The first will be through the mentors. We will be in contact with the mentors and let them know about the evaluation and in what ways we would love the youth to participate. So hopefully through this, if they have a strong bond with their mentor, that might encourage them to get involved. It's also important to note that this whole program is voluntary and that youth are signing up. They're recommended or referred to the program, but it's completely voluntary on their end. And so we're hoping that because youth are willing to be engaged in this program, they have a vested interest in it. And if they can identify ways that we could improve the program for them, that they will be involved in that. We also have different incentives that will be provided based on their involvement. So there are incentives for the advisory committee, for the focus groups, and for the questionnaires that aren't administered to the youth. But for those two elements, there are. Amanda can speak more to that about what the specific monetary incentives are.
Yeah, so we have incentives for, so kind of to answer the second half of your question, because Claire answered the first half. In terms of engaging them in data collection, we have kind of developed incentives, and we had a lot of discussion because we were very aware of the budget, and we were very aware that there were limits on what we could do for incentives, both for budget reasons and of course for ethical reasons. So for the virtual focus groups, and if you have our slides at all, it's also on there, but we proposed for the mentors and the mentees that we would do 2 draws for $50 entertainment gift cards per virtual focus group. And then the other method that we also incentivized youth participation with was Art Voice. So we also proposed a draw for entertainment gift cards per site that we are asking from the Art Voice participation. So kind of the incentives coupled with what Claire has already talked about, recruitment through mentees, and the idea that the participation in the program is voluntary, so they kind of are somewhat interested in involvement already. And we're kind of hoping the combination of things there, we would reach our goal for the amount of kind of youth we wanted for each data collection method and for the advisory groups.
And I think another component that is a big, sorry, I'm right here.
I know, but it's showing us me talking.
Another component that I think is a large strength of our evaluation is the use of virtual focus groups. So a lot of the time, there is maybe some associated burden with youth having to get to a focus group and maybe participate where they don't want to interact with their peers when it's a little bit of a difficult conversation to have. One of the mitigation strategies, I think, for this would be the use of a virtual focus group where you don't need to necessarily attend physically a focus group. You can attend on your own time whenever it is best suits you. And then there's also that kind of ability to remain anonymous or confidential.
Mm-hmm. There's also the other element of the focus groups that we have as moderators, in that we can go in and send follow-up prompts or messages directly to participants. So if we find that there's a participant where they mention something that we would like to hear more about, we can provide a follow-up directly to them. Or if there are participants who aren't engaged, we can potentially send them a message and see why they may not be getting engaged, or if there's a way that we can help facilitate that engagement.
Thanks. Fred, I think you're next.
Yeah, I'm the next. Thank you so much. Exciting presentation, very detailed. I almost have not the time to print all this before you start, but it's really well done. Thank you so much. Really insightful. I would like to address 2 points in your presentation. One around methods. So I guess I'll speak directly to Amanda. And the other one around project management. So yeah, so what we do with the potential participants that were not able to participate to the program. Basically, what are your strategies to at least take stock or their perspective, you know, on that program moving forward? So that's my first question. And my second question, I guess, for Ellie, it's more around, I looked at your timeline. I find it very, very optimistic, given the budget and the amount we have to spend on that first ever evaluation of our activities. It's just how can you manage delivering all this very, very good design within 6 weeks, and being conscious of the 3 main elements of the project, which are time, quality, and budget. So I would like to hear you, Ellie, around, okay, if there's something going wrong or unexpected, so on which variable you will play to make that evaluation happen within a time frame.
So I guess I'll go first with the methods question, and then I'll pass it over to Ali. So your question, correct me if I'm wrong, it was asking about engaging people who did not participate in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, who might have been kind of referred but didn't end up participating. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we discussed this briefly on our team about kind of data collection strategies to get at these folks. In the end, you'll notice we kind of didn't have any data collection strategies that specifically targeted these folks. And the reason for that was in part to balance all kind of the methods we already had, but also because we've chosen an impact evaluation, chosen and kind of told to do an impact evaluation for this particular RFP. And so we really wanted to focus on the impacts that this program saw on the people that participated in it, whether that's intended impacts that are illustrated in the theory of change from the kind of broader Big Brothers Big Sisters, or whether that's unintended consequences that we don't really know about, right? I think that if we wanted to collect that type of data, the way we would go about that is probably the first thing I would do is ask the advisory committee, because I think that they might have a lot more insight into any sort of barriers that there were to participating. Like, I'm sure that not all of them were kind of, as soon as they heard about the program, they're like, absolutely, yeah, 100%. So if they have any insight onto like barriers as to why they might not have wanted to participate, or maybe they know people who might not wanted to participate, we can kind of have that conversation and get at that information a little bit more. And then we can make data collection strategies from there. But yeah, that would definitely be a challenge. Kind of, you have the challenge of engaging youth, and then you have kind of the added challenge of if we're trying to engage youth who didn't necessarily want to be engaged in the first place. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I can add to that too before Ali answers the second part of that question. Something we've talked about too is, I mean, as a way to, we kind of avoided this as a way to mitigate scope creep too early on, but this is definitely something that we can incorporate into our conversations with referring parties and parents and school administrators. And kind of, so what it sounds like is if youth are referred to the program but they don't end up participating, it might be the case that those are particularly at risk group of students or youth, and we wouldn't want to disqualify them from the evaluation or kind of not get their perspective at all. So what we did talk about briefly was expanding that questionnaire perhaps to more of a focus group with some representative counselors, with social services in the areas that the evaluation is being conducted in. Yes, but to echo what Amanda said, any strategies that we would take in that direction would definitely be consulted with our advisory committee, and particularly the one that isn't only composed of children.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then to address your second question, I am going to also call on the hidden other project manager of our team, Claire. So I can answer your question around budget, and definitely one of the biggest challenges that we had talked about right from the beginning is the small budget and the short time frame that we had. For a lot of our practices, we were given a lot more budget to work with and a lot more days to work with. So with regards to the budget, I think where we were able to save a lot of our money is through the use of virtual focus groups, where it saves us money and it also saves us time for conducting them, where it limits the amount of travel spending we have, as well as transcribing them. So there's a lot of time with transcribing qualitative data. With this virtual focus group platform, a lot of that is already done. So it really alleviates a lot of the time commitment to working with qualitative data. So by saving money and time for our actual data collection components, we were able to resource that for our KT initiatives and like thank yous for participating.
Okay.
A little bit about our timeline. So we were given 20 to 30 consulting days. That roughly translates to about 6 weeks of if you were to work just during business days. That's not necessarily that we're going to work all 5 days or spend full days for each of those 6 weeks. There is some flexibility, and I think that's something that we'll talk about with the advisory group in our first meeting on that first week. We can begin our data collection from the document review right away and get a sense and make a plan moving forward. But I think we are flexible in that, especially since we have those last 4 weeks. So we put a 10-week timeline. We have those 4 weeks for KT work, and we can always adjust that if necessary. And I think that the advisory committee will have good input on that because they'll know how responsive youth and family members and counselors might be to this work.
Okay, thank you. Nathalie?
Hi, thank you so much. Very interesting, very professional presentation. I enjoyed very much hearing your proposal. My colleagues have asked very good questions, so we're getting a very good sense of the strengths of your approach and how you're going to carry this out. I have a question that arises from really one of the strengths, I think, of your approach. I really like your governance structure and the fact that you have included an advisory committee of youth with representation from all 5 of the communities. But my question is, these are all very different communities. Lloydminster's a very different place from Regina or Saskatoon or Yorkton. And you've organized your proposal around 3 kind of core programs, but I'm wondering if the story will be able to be told about each of these communities in a way that will speak to them if you're going to just be gathering up information across them. How are you going to balance the need for specificity for the stakeholders to recognize themselves and then also to have a collective statement that also aligns with the national questions?
That's a great question. So one of the elements of the virtual focus groups, which is another strength to this method, is that when participants log on, they'll have an initial questionnaire and consent form. And part of that, we will have participants indicate which agency or area they're from. And then when we're downloading the transcripts, or I guess the data from the focus groups, there's the ability to filter. And so you can filter based on the different regions. And so we can see if there are potentially trends or different themes that arise from each of the specific jurisdictions or areas. And that also kind of works in when we're moderating the focus groups, because you can see that from our back kind of researcher end. And so we can provide specific follow-ups or prompts to individual participants and gather more information on a given topic if necessary.
Okay, so you would be analyzing communities separately. Would you do a separate report? What if there were differences between the communities? I'm pushing a little bit here.
Yeah, so I think definitely we would, we've discussed briefly the fact that we would have to look at kind of analyze the data separately as well. So I think echoing what Claire has said, using those more demographic questions that we're able to ask very easily through the virtual focus group platforms, we'll be able to kind of parse those data out. If the case happens where there's not enough of a of representation, perhaps from each kind of site to warrant stratifying in that way, if you want to say, then that's something we'll have to, of course, consult with our advisory group. And I'm kind of wondering if it could be possible that we group similar settings together. So if Regina and Saskatoon have more of a similar, composition in terms of participants, then it might be worth grouping them together and the other sites separately. And one thing we spent some time talking about too was the fact that we very much can be flexible with the way that we administer each of our evaluation elements. So one thing, for example, if in Westminster it's not necessarily feasible that we even conduct virtual focus groups at all, if the resources aren't there, or if the kind of engagement isn't there, if it's difficult to engage those youth and committee members, then we can definitely kind of work with local community members and maybe organize an in-person focus group. For the purpose of budget, we decided to go with virtual focus groups, and we really felt that it was a novel way of doing things very timely and succinctly. But there's definitely a lot of flexibility where we can have somebody perhaps that the youth are more comfortable talking with than a bunch of evaluators, and actually be there in person.
Thank you.
I think also, sorry to add on, these are lengthy responses to our questions, but we're including our advisory committees in our data analysis. And so I think their perspective and their input on that will be really critical, because I think they'll be able to identify maybe nuances in the responses that we might not be able to pick up on. And so having that input will really help, I think, create the results and present the results in a meaningful way to both participants and stakeholders.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions from the judges. Emily, your fellow judges, Natalie and Fred, both had a chance to ask 2 questions. Did you want to ask one more before we move to the sponsors for their questions?
I think that's okay. I asked a multi-part question, so I think it's fine.
Great, thank you. So now I'd like to turn to our sponsors. We have 2 who have agreed to ask some questions, or who have shown an interest in asking questions. We have Rochelle Zorzi from Cathexis and Karen Croteau from Goss Gilroy. Rochelle, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I know that, thank you very much for your presentation. It was an excellent presentation. And my question is around maximizing the impact and actionability of your evaluation. I know that the evaluation itself is focused on impacts and telling the story of these programs. But I'm wondering if you could highlight some of the elements of your proposed approach that will help the 5 Big Brothers and Big Sisters agencies take action based on the evaluation findings, because inevitably you will find some things that maybe aren't working as well as they had hoped, or opportunities for improvement. So are there aspects of your approach that you think will help them take action afterwards or during?
Yeah, I can start off this response. So I think a lot of the usability of the findings is going to come from our knowledge translation approaches. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier, we actually chose to focus more of the budget on knowledge translation than and kind of sacrificing it for data collection for that reason. So we proposed a few different approaches. So, you know, 1-3-25 report is I guess a little bit traditional. We did propose having the 1-page report be an infographic, though. That's something that on our team as a whole, just real world experience, we've found that that's a lot more useful than just kind of a page of text. We also proposed doing a webinar, and the reason for that is it kind of gives people the opportunity to ask questions, right? So like, we provide this information, but what if it's not something that, that is understandable, or what if there are points of confusion? The idea behind the webinar is that they have a chance to ask those questions that they might have. And we also proposed the art gallery night as an appreciation, but also as a knowledge, like a novel knowledge translation strategy as well. Hopefully, kind of the combination of approaches, and keeping in mind that these would all be informed by our advisory groups. So these are really just suggestions of knowledge translation strategies that honestly, like, we thought would work on our team and that we like, but definitely we would be open to other approaches as well. Hopefully the combination of different approaches and different knowledge translation strategies would really help engage the different stakeholders and make the findings usable.
Hey, thank you for your question, Rochelle. I'll turn to Karen Croteau of Goss Gilroy. Would you like to ask a question? Maybe Karen wasn't able to join us.
Karen is here. She's
there.
I did unmute her. There she is.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me join you guys today. It was a great presentation. You did a wonderful job, really good quality. My question is around your considerations for youth as a vulnerable population, realizing that there's high diversity in the groups that Big Brother, Big Sisters are working with. Potentially youth at risk, potentially socially disadvantaged, and while your approach to have online virtual focus groups and presentation of, you know, your art showcase subsequent to the wrap up of the project, do you have any mitigating strategy to make sure that those that might not have access to the technology tools that you are suggesting be used, that you wouldn't preclude them based on either their ability to join or not join using the methods that you put forward?
could take that question. We have discussed this. So one of the strategies would be, in terms of the virtual focus groups and access to technology that would enable a participant to use that platform. We did talk about working potentially with local sites and also the schools that students are attending to provide that technology. And in terms of photo voice, we definitely do not want to preclude anyone from who might not have access to a camera or to a camera phone from participating, which is why we've kind of enhanced that to be an art voice, which we haven't seen anywhere else, but we definitely are quite proud of this strategy that we've put together. And, we've also discussed there being camera loans through public libraries, and it's something that we can facilitate. I think, Amanda, you might have something else to add to that.
Just to add on to that, so I think that for any method that we're doing, whether it's virtual focus groups or the art voice approaches, something that we discussed was making clear from the get-go during our recruitment that having access to technology or to a camera or to like art supplies, if you wanted to kind of create something, shouldn't be a barrier. So it shouldn't be like a qualification in order to participate. And I think that it's on us to make that clear during our recruitment. And as Isabella mentioned, we can work with the Big Brothers, Big Sisters, like local jurisdictions to see what supplies they have access to. And if they don't, like Isabella said, there are so many options for accessing supplies that would kind of save budget, like loans through libraries and stuff like that, or schools.
Hey, thank you very much for the questions from Goss Gilroy and Cathexis. I'm looking at the time, and we'd still like to get 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So I'm going to hand it over to Christine, and Christine will read 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll take a brief break before we come back for the next presentation.
Thanks everyone who shared their questions. We had lots of great questions, but we had a couple of questions that focused on how you want to include Indigenous communities in your evaluation. You noted that there would be at least 1 elder included within your advisory committee. The audience is interested in knowing why you felt that was important within the specific Saskatchewan context. And then building on that, the audience was also interested in understanding more about how you are going to weave participation from Indigenous communities throughout your evaluation design, just beyond including an elder in your advisory committee. And lastly, some questions around or thoughts on how representative 1 elder on an advisory committee might be to all of the views of Indigenous peoples that are participating in the program.
Yeah, those are all great questions. I think the first thing we wanted to note is that because the population of both youth and mentors and population of Saskatchewan as a whole is very diverse, we hope to represent or at least include a lot of diversity within our committees. Specifically with the Youth Advisory Committee, we really hope to have a diverse selection so that it's not possible to have every single group represented within the advisory committee, but we hope to have enough diversity, I guess, within that committee to help guide our evaluation. I think it's really important because as for women from Ontario, we don't have a lot of the same lived experiences, and every youth will have their own specific experience. And so having individuals who are a little bit more familiar with either the context or the specific region or community where youth are from, I think that is absolutely essential for this evaluation. I'm not sure, Isabella, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, well, with respect to the first question, we kind of grappled whether the fact we would be recruiting 1 or more elders. I think it's important to note that we don't want to overburden communities as well. So in terms of community engagement, we want to make this very much so meaningful and have someone there, members of the community on the committee that youth and participants can feel comfortable speaking with and engaging with, whether that's verbal communication or through the art programs that we've put in place. So that is something that we'll probably want to get feedback from our committee on. I can't, really stress that enough, that's really what we're hoping to do through the evaluation, is that every decision we make is definitely participatory, and is not only kind of us making that decision, but we want to engage the community, and that needs to include representation from First Nations and Métis communities in Saskatchewan. To be honest, Christine, I kind of lost track of your second question.
So people want to know more about how you're going to weave the voices and experience of Indigenous communities throughout your evaluation approach and design beyond just the advisory committee, and also any limitations that need to be considered if you're just having, one or two representatives or elder representatives on your committee, and how representative that will be of all Indigenous people that participate in the program.
Okay, so to answer the second question, something we mentioned briefly was kind of the concept of Indigenous ways of knowing and learning. So I think our art voice activities really try to mitigate some of the cultural barriers that we definitely want to avoid. So kind of incorporating a more inclusive and culturally sensitive, I want to say, aspect to avoid kind of relying on the traditional ways of Western knowledge, gathering and disseminating that we might be used to.
Okay, thank you very much, Orbis Solutions. It's now 4:30. We are going to take a 5-minute break, give everybody a chance to get up and stretch their legs and have a little health break if needed, and we'll come back to see the presentation by Recenter Consulting from Simon Fraser University. So let's just take 5 minutes, turn off put yourself on mute.